They told my brother his 6 weeks of work wasn't needed in a group text the night before the party, while he was still sanding the edges. My name is Sarah, and if you've ever watched someone you love pour everything they have into something beautiful, only to have someone reduce it to an inconvenience, stay with me. Because when I read that text over my brother's shoulder and watched his hands go still on that workbench, I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means you're okay, the kind that means you've made a decision. Let me back up. My grandfather turned 80 this past spring. 80 years. A man who worked double shifts at a factory for 30 years so his kids could go to college, who showed up to every single one of my brother's school plays even when he could barely walk on his bad knee, who called us every Sunday morning without fail and always said the same thing at the end: "You kids are my best work." When my aunt took over planning his party, she made it very clear it was going to be a big deal. A venue rental, catered food, a photo booth, 200 guests, including people from their church and the old neighborhood, and even some of my grandfather's former coworkers. She sent a 7-page planning document to the family group chat. 7 pages. My brother read every word of it. He was 17. Quiet in the way that meant he was always thinking 3 steps ahead, the kind of kid who taught himself woodworking from YouTube videos and had already sold a few cutting boards to neighbors. When he heard about the party, he came to me first. Not our parents, not our grandfather. Me. He showed me a sketch on a piece of notebook paper. A large wooden memory board, 6 feet tall, hand-carved with our grandfather's name, our family tree branching out across the top, and slots for photos spanning 80 years. He wanted to hand-letter our grandfather's favorite saying along the bottom rail: "You kids are my best work." I looked at that sketch for a long time. I said, "Do it." He spent 6 weeks on it. He woke up at 5:30 on school days so he could get an hour in before the bus came. He watched his budget carefully, choosing wood, sanding between coats, testing the engraving depth. He asked me once, late on a Tuesday night, if I thought our grandfather would cry. I told him honestly that I thought our grandfather might not be able to speak for a full minute. My brother smiled at that, this small, satisfied smile, and went back to work. My aunt knew about it. We had told her in the first week. She said, over text, and I remember this exactly: "That sounds sweet. We'll find a place for it." 3 days before the party, she posted photos of the hired decorator setting up at the venue. White linens, LED uplighting, a slideshow loop running on a projection screen. It looked like a hotel conference room, trying to feel like a celebration. But fine, I thought. The board would still be there. It would still matter. The night before the party. At 9:47 p.m., the group text notification lit up my phone. It was from my aunt. I want to use the exact words because they matter. She wrote, "Hi all, quick update. We've decided to keep the decor consistent with the venue's professional setup. Homemade items won't fit the aesthetic we're going for. Please don't bring them to the event. We want everything to look polished and cohesive. Thanks for understanding." There was no name. There was no acknowledgement of what homemade items meant. There was no apology. Just that word aesthetic, sitting there like a closed door. I looked up from my phone. My brother was across the workbench from me, a piece of sandpaper still in his hand, reading the same message on his own screen. I watched the color leave his face. Not dramatically, not with tears. Just quietly, the way a light goes out when the power cuts. He set the sandpaper down very carefully, like he was afraid of making noise. "Did I waste 6 weeks?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, because I was busy looking at that memory board behind him. The hand-carved letters, each one even and deliberate. The family tree with all our names. Our grandfather's face in a small carved oval at the top, done from a photograph my brother had studied for hours. And at the bottom, in careful block letters he'd practiced on cardboard before committing to wood. "You kids are my best work." "No," I said. "She did something stupid." "That's different." He nodded once, slow. But I could see it, something behind his eyes that had flickered out. I picked up my phone. I typed one word back to the group text: "Understood." Then I called our grandfather. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always did. I said, "Hey, Pop. I need to ask you something. Are you free tomorrow afternoon, before the party?" He said, "For you?" "I'm always free," I said. Good. Come to the house. And wear something you don't mind getting a little emotional in. Then I made other calls. Not out of revenge, I want to be clear about that, because what I was feeling wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity. Like when fog lifts and you realize the road you've been on has been wrong for miles. I called my parents. I called two of my grandfather's oldest friends, a man who'd worked the line beside him for 15 years and a woman from their church who had known our grandmother before she passed. I called my best friend, who owned a nice camera. I called the neighbor 2 houses down who'd bought one of my brother's cutting boards and had been following his work ever since. I told them all the same thing: come to our house tomorrow at noon. There's something you need to see. My brother didn't know what I was doing. He'd gone to bed quiet and I'd let him. Some things you have to sleep on alone. In the morning, I found him at the workbench again before I was even fully awake, finishing the last edge of the base rail. He didn't say anything. He just kept working. And I thought, that's who he is. They tried to make him feel like his work was worthless, and he went back to make it better anyway. At 11:45, people started arriving. My grandfather pulled into the driveway, and my brother came out to help him up the porch steps, still not knowing what was waiting in the garage. My grandfather asked what was going on. I said, just come see. My brother looked at me, uncertain, and I nodded at him to go ahead and open the garage door. He hesitated. Then he lifted it. The light came in across the memory board, and my grandfather went absolutely still. He stood there for a long moment. His hands came up to his face, and then, just like I'd told my brother, he couldn't speak for a full minute. When he finally found his voice, it came out rough and low. Son, did you make this? My brother said, yes, sir. My grandfather reached out and touched the carved letters at the bottom. His fingers traced each one. When he turned around, his eyes were red, and he looked at my brother the way people look at something they didn't know they needed until they saw it. This, he said, is the finest thing anyone has ever made for me in 80 years. My best friend was already shooting. Natural light, no staging. Just the two of them, my grandfather's weathered hand on the wood, my brother standing beside him trying to hold it together. Some of the photos were extraordinary. The kind that don't look like they were taken. They look like they were found. We stayed in that garage for 2 hours. The old man who'd worked the factory line beside my grandfather started talking about what my grandfather was like at 25, stories nobody at the catered venue was going to hear. The woman from church started singing softly, the old hymn my grandmother had loved, and my grandfather closed his eyes and just listened. My brother stood to the side, watching. And I watched him watch them, his face slowly filling back up with something that had been emptied out the night before. Later, when people started filtering out to head to the official party, my grandfather held my brother by both shoulders and said, "You don't let them tell you what your work is worth. You understand me? You don't give them that power." My brother nodded. Something in him had settled. We went to the party. We didn't bring the memory board, obviously. We didn't say a word about it. We smiled and ate the catered food and made small talk near the projection screen slideshow, which was fine. It was perfectly fine. My aunt floated through the room looking satisfied, checking things off her mental list, glancing over occasionally with that particular smile people wear when they believe they've managed everything correctly. At one point she came over to me and said, with genuine warmth, that she was glad we understood and that the evening really did need a consistent look. I said, "It looks beautiful," because the room did look beautiful. It just didn't feel like anything. I watched my grandfather across the room, moving from group to group, and I noticed that every time someone gave a toast or said a kind word, he smiled the right smile, the performed one. But when he caught my brother's eye from across the room, his face did something different. That was the real one. That night, after the party, my best friend edited and posted 4 of the photos to her photography page with my permission. She tagged it simply, "A grandson's gift." Within 6 hours, it had been shared 200 times. By morning, it had been shared over 4,000. The woodworking community had found it. People were tagging my brother's name, asking where they could see more of his work, asking if he took commissions. He didn't have a page. He did by noon. By Monday, my inbox had something I didn't expect. A message from the owner of a local furniture restoration shop, asking if my brother would be interested in an apprenticeship. A message from a family in the next town over who had seen the photos and wanted something similar for their grandmother's 90th birthday. And a message from the art and design department of a university 3 hours away, asking if my brother had considered applying, because his work had been shared by one of their faculty members. I showed him the messages one by one. He read each one in silence. When he got to the last one, he set my phone down, put his hands flat on the workbench, and stared at nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I need to build a website." I said, "Yeah, you do." The other messages started that same week. First, my uncle called, speaking in that careful measured tone men use when they're trying to sound reasonable about something unreasonable. He said there was no need to make a big deal of it, that the post had made the family look bad, that my aunt had only been trying to keep the event professional. I listened to the whole thing, and then I said, very calmly, she told a 17-year-old in a group text the night before a party that 6 weeks of his work didn't fit her aesthetic. I didn't post anything. My friend posted her own photos from her own page. If the family looks bad, I'd look at where that actually started. He didn't have a response to that. Then came my aunt herself. She called on a Wednesday and said the photos should be taken down. That it was a private family moment, that I had made her look like a villain when she was just trying to do her job. She said the word hurtful 4 times in one sentence, which is something I've noticed people do when they want to borrow the language of being hurt without doing the work of acknowledging someone else's pain. I said, "What you said in that text was hurtful to my brother." She said, "He's young. He'll get over it." I said, "He got over it fast. He has 3 commissions and a university reaching out to him. I'm less worried about him now than I was 48 hours ago." She went quiet in a different way. The recalibrating kind. "You're making this into something it isn't," she said. "I'm not making it into anything," I said. "I'm just watching what it already is." I hung up gently. What I didn't say, because I was saving it, was what I had found in the photos my best friend had sent me. The ones from before the official party. My grandfather in the garage, hand on the memory board, eyes red. Because in that moment, I had quietly decided something. That board was going to be seen by the people who should see it. Not as a statement. Not as retaliation. Just as what it was. The following weekend, we hosted a second gathering. No invitations beyond a few calls. My grandfather and his oldest friends. My parents. Some neighbors who had followed the posts. We set the memory board up in the living room, properly lit. And we spent an afternoon the way the official party never quite managed to, telling stories, laughing hard, eating food my mother made. Nobody checking their phone for a consistent aesthetic. My grandfather stood next to that board for most of the afternoon, pointing out the carved family tree to people, explaining names, recounting things. At one point, I heard him tell the factory friend, "My grandson did this. 6 weeks. By hand." And the pride in his voice was not the performed kind. My brother moved through the room differently than he had at the official party. Taller, somehow. More present. When the university program coordinator had emailed again asking for a portfolio, I had helped him scan and photograph 12 pieces over 2 evenings. He'd been building things for 3 years and had never thought of it as something that could take him somewhere. He'd been building things because he couldn't stop, because it was the only time his brain felt quiet. Because wood was honest, it told you exactly where you'd gone wrong and let you sand it back and try again. He'd never called it art. He just called it what he did. Watching him explain the memory board's joinery to an interested neighbor, watching him use words like grain direction and kerf and mortise with the ease of someone who'd earned that vocabulary, I thought about my aunt's word again. Aesthetic. She wanted aesthetic. My brother had given our grandfather something nobody could photograph into something better than it already was. The week after the second gathering, I got a call from my mother's sister, not my aunt, a different one, the quiet one who had always stayed out of family politics. She said, "I heard what happened. I want you to know I think you did right." Then she paused and said something I hadn't expected. "Your grandfather updated his living trust last year. I don't know the details, but after what happened, he called his lawyer again. I thought you should know that's happening." I told her I didn't need to know the details. I wasn't in this for whatever was in any document. She said, "I know. That's why I'm telling you." My aunt came to the house one more time. Unannounced, on a Tuesday evening, wearing her good coat, her face set in the careful expression of someone who has decided to be gracious. I opened the door and waited. She said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I said, "I think my brother had 6 weeks of work dismissed in a group text the night before a party." She said, "I've apologized for that." She hadn't, but I let it stand. "I want us to be okay, Sarah. We're family." I looked at her. I thought about my brother at 5:30 in the morning, standing before school. I thought about the night his hands went still and the color left his face. I thought about my grandfather saying this is the finest thing anyone has ever made for me in 80 years, and the way my brother had exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. I said, "We are family. And I'm not angry with you. But I want you to understand something." I kept my voice steady. "When you sent that text, you didn't just redirect a core choice. You told a 17-year-old that his best effort was less important than a room looking polished. You did it casually, in a group message, without a single word of acknowledgement for what he'd made. He asked me if he'd wasted 6 weeks. That question came out of what you sent." She opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said, not unkindly. "He didn't waste 6 weeks. But you could have just as easily broken something in him that wouldn't have been fixable. You got lucky that it went the other way." "I don't think you know that." She stood in the threshold for a moment. Something moved across her face that might have been genuine. She said, "I didn't think about it that way." I said, "I know." I didn't invite her in. I didn't close the door in anger. I just said gently, "We'll see you at the next family thing." And I meant it. I didn't need her to be a villain. I just needed her to understand what she'd done, and I think, maybe for the first time, she did. The apprenticeship started in June. My brother spent his first summer working 2 days a week at the restoration shop, learning things about wood that couldn't be learned from videos. The owner was a 60-year-old man who had been doing this work for 40 years and had the hands to prove it. He told my mother, after the first week, that my brother had more instinct for the craft than anyone he'd trained in the last decade. My mother called me crying, the good kind. The university program sent a formal letter of encouragement with an application fee waiver. My brother was still 2 years out from applying, but he pinned it above his workbench. The memory board now lives in my grandfather's study. He moved furniture to accommodate it. Some mornings, he told me, he just sits and looks at it for a while before the day starts. He said it was the first thing he'd ever had that held the whole family in one place, every name and every branch, and he could put his hand on any of it. My grandfather called me one Sunday, the usual call, and at the end he said something different than his usual sign-off. He said, "What you did for your brother, I want you to know I saw it. He's going to be all right because you didn't let them decide that for him. That's not a small thing." I said, "He would have been all right anyway." My grandfather said, "Maybe, but it would have taken longer. And it would have left a mark." I've thought about that a lot since then. How many marks people carry from moments exactly like that one, someone in authority, reducing their work to an inconvenience, and nobody around them making it clear that the authority was wrong. How ordinary that is. How devastating. My brother doesn't talk about what my aunt sent him. He's not the kind to hold onto grievances, which is one of his best qualities. But one evening, while I was helping him photograph a commissioned piece of family crest panel for a couple's new home, he said, almost offhandedly, "You know what I think about sometimes? How different this year would have been if you hadn't made those calls." I said, "You would have figured it out." He said, "Yeah, but I was pretty low that night. Like, genuinely. I was sitting on the floor of the garage at midnight wondering if I should just sell the wood." I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything useful to say to that. He kept photographing the piece from different angles. Then he said, "I'm glad you made the calls." I said, "Me too." What I didn't tell him, because some things you carry alone as the older sibling, was that I had sat in my car in the driveway that night after he went to bed and cried for about 20 minutes. Not because I was sad, because I was furious in the precise, clarifying way that comes when someone mistreats a person you love and believes they'll get away with it clean. I cried until it burned through, and then I went inside and started texting people. The first commission check my brother received came in mid-July. $340 for the family crest panel. He held it for a long time before depositing it. He told me later that the feeling wasn't what he expected. It wasn't about the money. It was something else, the proof, he said, that the work was real, that it existed in the world outside his own need to make it. That someone had seen it and said, yes, this is worth something. I want this in my home. My aunt sent a gift card for his birthday in August. No card. Just a gift card, $40, tucked inside a plain envelope. My brother thanked her in a group text. I didn't say anything at all. My grandfather's 81st birthday is already being planned. He told my aunt he wanted it simple this year. Just family, at my parents' house, casual. She offered to handle the decor. He said, very kindly, that he thought he'd like my brother to do it. I heard she didn't respond for 2 days. My brother is already sketching. And every morning when I drive past the furniture shop where he apprentices, I think about that night. The workbench. The sandpaper going still. The question, did I waste 6 weeks? Sometimes the answer to that question is up to the people around you more than it's up to you. Sometimes being loved well means someone looks at the road you're on and refuses to let you believe what the wrong people told you about it. It doesn't require a big gesture. It just requires not going quiet when quiet is exactly what the wrong people are counting on. My brother didn't need me to fix anything. He needed someone to make one call. And then another. And then to open the garage door at the right moment and let the light come in. That's all it was. And I would do it again without a second thought.